because I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kind of things I'm telling you, is me.
He was a killer without a pattern. No clear motive, no recognizable victim type. Israel Keyes operated in complete anonymity, hiding in plain sight as he traveled across the United States, quietly orchestrating acts of unspeakable horror. He planned meticulously, selected his victims at random, and struck without warning. His crimes left no trail, only trauma. From Alaska to Vermont, he buried tools of death, so-called kill kits, in remote locations, sometimes years in advance, waiting for the perfect moment to return and unleash his violence. But how did such a man go unnoticed for so long? What was driving him? And how many victims did he really claim? One of the darkest chapters of his spree unfolded in Essex, Vermont, a quiet town known more for its small-town charm than for tragedy. Located just outside Burlington, Essex blended rural life with suburban convenience. With a population of around 22,000, it was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and crime was rare. That peace was shattered on the morning of June 9, 2011, when Bill Currier, 49, and his wife Lorraine Currier, 55, failed to show up for work. Both were known as reliable, responsible people, deeply rooted in the community. Their sudden absence set off alarms. Friends and co-workers quickly contacted authorities. When police arrived at the couple's home, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The garage door stood wide open, the house was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of Bill or Lorraine. Inside, the scene was even more disturbing. Items had been scattered as if a struggle had taken place, and bloodstains were found throughout the home. The phone lines had been cut, and packaging from zip ties was left behind, suggesting abduction. Most chilling of all, the couple's car was missing. It became clear this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a calculated attack. But there were no leads, no obvious suspects, and no indication of where they might have been taken. Bill and Lorraine Currier lived simple, honest lives. Bill worked as a night shift caretaker in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Vermont. He was known for his quiet strength, humility, and unwavering work ethic. Lorraine worked in the financial services department at Fletcher Allen Healthcare. She was compassionate, thoughtful, and deeply committed to her family and community. Their life together was peaceful, defined by a love of the outdoors and a shared appreciation for Vermont's natural beauty. To everyone who knew them, they were the last people anyone would expect to be targeted in such a horrific crime. Search efforts for the couple began immediately and expanded quickly. Police, federal agents, and community volunteers scoured the surrounding area, woodlands, valleys, remote highways. Surveillance footage was reviewed. Canvassing was done door to door. But despite the urgency and scale of the investigation, no substantial clues surfaced. Days turned to weeks. Weeks became months. The case went cold. Then nearly a year later, a break came from thousands of miles away, in Anchorage, Alaska. In March 2012, Israel Keyes was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Koenig, an 18-year-old barista. During his subsequent interrogation, investigators began to realize that they were dealing with something much more terrifying, a serial killer who had traveled across the country, killing people at random and hiding his tracks with chilling precision. Eventually, Keyes confessed to the murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier. He described how he had broken into their Essex home late at night. He tied them up, cut the phone line, and transported them to an abandoned farmhouse. There, away from any chance of rescue, he killed them. His reason? None. According to Keyes, they were simply home. The farmhouse where the couple was murdered was later demolished, erasing any trace of the crime. Their bodies were never found, and the families were left without the chance to lay them to rest. Even in death, Keyes maintained control. His confession was chilling not only in detail, but in its complete lack of remorse. He had no hatred for the Curriers. He didn't even know them. He simply wanted to kill, and they were available. With the confession to Bill and Lorraine Currier's murder, investigators began to realize the scale of what they were dealing with. Israel Keyes wasn't a man who had simply snapped. He was a predator who had spent years honing his ability to kill and disappear without leaving a trace. Keyes didn't just murder, he planned. Every move, every action was mapped out months, sometimes years in advance. He traveled across the country, targeting victims in different states. There was no emotional trigger, no pattern, no victim profile. His attacks were completely random, a strategy designed to make detection nearly impossible. To facilitate his crimes, Keyes devised a chilling innovation: kill kits. These kits were metal buckets or containers filled with weapons, zip ties, cash, and other tools needed for murder and disposal. He buried them in remote locations across the U.S., under trees, near rivers, in abandoned lots, then returned months or years later, often traveling thousands of miles to do so. When investigators began questioning him, Keyes admitted that many of these kits were still out there, waiting. Some were eventually recovered, one in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, another in Alaska, but many others remain undiscovered to this day. The FBI launched a massive nationwide effort to trace his movements and find links to other cases. As the interviews continued, Keyes revealed fragments of other crimes: murders in Washington, New York, Vermont, and possibly Texas and Florida. But for each name he mentioned, he withheld another. He controlled every detail, confessing just enough to keep the attention on him without revealing full truths. What became increasingly clear was that Keyes thrived on control, not just over his victims, but over the investigation itself. He toyed with interrogators, dropping hints, withholding names, and smirking when asked direct questions. When shown photos of possible victims, he would pause, stare, and offer cryptic responses.
So what happened after you entered the house?
Oh, I don't know, told them right away what was going on.
Were they cooperative at first, at least?
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty shocked.
I'm sure.
People never expect stuff to happen to them.
Do you remember what you told them?
I just, it's like a blitz attack. You just make sure they know right away who's in charge and immediately tie them up, tell them what the rules are, that there's no talking unless I talk to them. They don't move unless I tell them to move, and did their hands behind their back and had them, pulled everything off the bed and got their hands and their feet together with cable ties and then just started talking, like asking them one question after the other.
So they you don't have to tell them, but they know they're being robbed. That's what they think is happening. They're being robbed.
Well, they kept trying to ask me. I didn't tell them what was happening. They kept trying to ask me what was going on, and I never answered them really. It's just have to keep telling them to shut up and listen to me.
In one case, he admitted to murdering a woman on the East Coast in the early 2000s. He said he dumped her body in upstate New York. To this day, her identity remains unknown. In another instance, he spoke of killing a couple in Washington long before he ever targeted the couriers. Again, their names and final resting place are still a mystery. Keyes was a nomad of death. He would fly or drive to a city, rent a car, and then travel hundreds of miles away from that destination before committing a crime. He paid in cash, avoided digital footprints, and stayed away from cities with cameras or dense populations. His planning was so thorough that even seasoned FBI agents were stunned. He was also skilled in other crimes: bank robberies, arson, and theft, which he used to fund his travels and criminal activity. After robbing banks, he would sometimes use the money to support his next trip to another state to carry out a murder. He committed at least one known robbery in Texas, wearing a hard hat and a wig, blending in like any other worker. It was during one interrogation that he chillingly mentioned the wig, claiming it wasn't synthetic but real human hair. When asked where he got it, he simply said, "You don't have to buy real hair to get real hair," and left it at that. This vague and cryptic behavior defined Keyes' entire relationship with investigators. He was smart, calculating, and enjoyed being the one in control of every conversation. His refusal to name victims or locations left many families without closure, and many cases still remain cold. Despite his partial confessions, law enforcement suspects Israel Keyes was responsible for far more than the 11 deaths he admitted to. His deliberate vagueness and fragmented admissions were likely designed to elevate his own mystery and legacy, while further tormenting the families of the missing. By the time he was in custody, the FBI believed that Israel Keyes might have been one of the most organized and most dangerous serial killers in modern American history. In custody, Israel Keyes remained eerily composed, detached, cryptic, and fully in control. He offered fragments of his crimes, teasing investigators with partial truths, but never granting them the satisfaction of full confessions. He refused to let the justice system decide his fate, and so, on December 2nd, 2012, he took that control back one final time. Keyes was found dead in his jail cell at the Anchorage Correctional Complex. He had used a hidden razor blade to slit his wrists and then strangled himself with a bedsheet. Next to his body lay a suicide note, a disturbing blend of poetry, disjointed thoughts, and morbid imagery. But there were no names, no maps, no confessions, just darkness. He died without revealing the full scope of his crimes. For investigators, it was a devastating loss, not of the man, but of the information he had taken with him. Without Keyes, dozens of leads suddenly turned cold. Trails that once held promise became dead ends. Families hoping for answers were once again left in the dark, but not everything he did remained hidden. Over the course of his interrogations, Keyes hinted at least 11 murders, though agents believed the number was much higher. Several unsolved cases across the country bore the chilling hallmarks of his methods: random victims, remote locations, sudden disappearances, and complete lack of forensic evidence. One of the earliest suspected victims was Julie Marie Harris, a 13-year-old girl from Colville, Washington. Julie was a double amputee and a Special Olympics athlete. She vanished on March 2nd, 1996, while waiting for a ride to church. A month later, her prosthetic feet were found near a river. Her remains were discovered a year later, but her cause of death was never determined. Keyes lived in the area at the time and was later questioned, but he neither confirmed nor denied involvement. Then there was Cassandra Cassie Emerson, just 12 years old, also from Colville. On June 27, 1997, her mother, Marlene Emerson, was found burned inside their trailer home. Cassie had vanished. A year later, her remains were discovered 13 miles away. Keyes would later admit that his first act of violence involved a trailer in Colville, further fueling suspicions that he was connected to this brutal case. Again, he offered no clear answers. In Washington state, he confessed to at least 5 murders, including a couple he claimed to have killed and buried in a remote location between 2001 and 2005. One body, he said, was submerged in a lake near Nia Bay. Another was dumped in Lake Crescent. Yet despite his admissions, no bodies have been recovered, and the victims remain unidentified. But his reach extended beyond the Pacific Northwest. In Florida, authorities suspect Keyes may be behind the infamous Boca Killer attacks. Between 2007 and 2008, several disturbing crimes occurred around a town center mall in Boca Raton. Victims were abducted from parking lots, some were killed, others survived. One of the victims, Randy Gorenberg, was shot and dumped nearby. Another mother and child were kidnapped but released unharmed. The suspect was described as tall and athletic, with long hair, matching Keyes' description at the time. The most heartbreaking case was the double murder of Nancy Bocicchio and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey, who were found bound and shot in their car, again in the mall parking lot. While Keyes never directly admitted to these crimes, law enforcement noted disturbing similarities in the method, appearance, and timing. In New Jersey, the case of Deborah Feldman raised further suspicion. A mother struggling with personal challenges, Feldman vanished on April 8, 2009, from her home in Hackensack. Her body has never been found. Investigators later discovered that Keyes had searched for information on her disappearance just before his arrest. When shown her photo, he reacted with a strange pause and said, "I don't want to talk about her yet." In Texas, the disappearance of James Jimmy Tidwell, a 58-year-old electrician, also came under scrutiny. Jimmy vanished in February 2012, just one day before a bank robbery took place in Azle, Texas. Surveillance footage from the robbery showed the suspect wearing a white hard hat, strikingly similar to one Jimmy wore for work, and a dark wig. Later, when asked about the wig, Keyes chillingly hinted that it was made from real human hair, suggesting an even darker implication. From coast to coast, cases like these stack up. Unsolved disappearances, missing persons, unexplained murders. While some have clearer ties to Keyes than others, the pattern is undeniable. Random victims, remote crimes, minimal evidence, and a suspect who thrived in the shadows. In many ways, Israel Keyes' death was his final crime. With him died the identities of victims, the locations of bodies, and the peace of mind that only truth can bring. For families and investigators, the silence he left behind was more cruel than any confession. Israel Keyes left behind no manifestos, no grand ideology, no explanation that could ever justify what he did. He wasn't driven by hatred, ideology, or vengeance. His motives were terrifyingly simple: control, dominance, and the thrill of killing. In the end, that made him even more dangerous. Unlike most serial killers, Keyes rejected any identity. He didn't want to be categorized. He avoided patterns, carefully selected locations far from home, and never killed close to where he lived. He studied how other killers were caught, and then did the opposite. That's what allowed him to operate for so long, without suspicion, without being tracked. To this day, the FBI continues to follow his trail. Using GPS records, rental car receipts, bank transactions, and his own fragmented confessions, investigators have spent years reconstructing Keyes' movements. Maps were drawn, missing persons cases were reopened, communities revisited memories of unsolved tragedies, wondering if he had passed through their towns. Dozens of families are still waiting. Some hold on to hope. Others simply want an answer, even a location, a name. In the aftermath of his suicide, law enforcement ramped up efforts to locate the remaining kill kits Keyes buried. A few were found, containing guns, silencers, zip ties, duct tape, money, and clothing. But most remain hidden. These caches of horror still lie beneath dirt and rock in unknown corners of America. Silent reminders of crimes that may never be solved. But as chilling as his story is, it is not the killer that should be remembered. It is the victims. Samantha Koenig, a bright 18-year-old barista, taken from her workplace and murdered in Alaska. Bill and Lorraine Currier, an ordinary couple, ripped from their peaceful home in Vermont. Julie Harris, Cassandra Emerson, Nancy Bacicchio, and her daughter Joey, and Deborah Feldman, each a person with a life, a voice, and a community left devastated in their absence. And many others, still unnamed, still missing, and still unaccounted for. Their stories are not just case files. They are lives lost too soon, and families who wake up every day not knowing what happened or why. Even after his death, Israel Keyes continues to cast a shadow over America's unsolved cases. His name is spoken quietly in law enforcement circles, not as a symbol of terror, but as a warning of what can happen when a man chooses evil and how methodical, emotionless violence can slip through the cracks of society. For investigators, his case remains open. For the public, his story remains a cautionary tale. And for the victims, known and unknown, it is vital that their memory endures. Because they were more than just victims. They were people, and they deserved better. If you found this story as haunting and thought-provoking as we did, consider supporting the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the darkest corners of history and crime. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the case of Israel Keyes? Are there still victims we may never know? Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and as always, stay safe.